Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carol Farzetta, Director of Real Estate Compliance with Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority, or IHCDA. We still have a few individuals that are joining the webinar, so we're going to wait a couple minutes and allow everyone an opportunity, especially due to the technical issues we had yesterday. And we will go ahead and get started. We do ask, just as a courtesy, that you please mute your line. That will ensure that the recording is able to be clear and as quiet as can be, other than my yapping for the next hour. Thank you. Line owner certification training. This training is being recorded, and the slides from the presentation will be available to participants on the IHCDA website. In this presentation, we're going to walk through the basic steps of IHCDA Online, specifically walking through how to add units, how to update utility allowances or enter utility allowances, entering in those tenant events, and then finally going through the finalization of the annual owner certification. We want to thank you all for joining us today. And as always, if you have any questions after this presentation, you may feel free to ask those questions, or you can send us an email and we can follow up directly with you. So in order to do a successful annual owner certification, some of the key steps that we need to first explore are going to be how to navigate through IHCDA online. This slide shows the order of what we will be discussing today, and in the slides that will be available for you as a reference if you need to go back and review just certain sections specifically instead of the entire presentation. So let's get started. First, the landing page for IHCDA Online. Oh, I apologize. I was just made aware that my presentation is not showing. So let me see if I can reshare. Apologize for that. So again, our landing page is listed here. Our website is online.ihcda.in.gov. Once you log into our website, you will see the Authority Online blue icon in the middle of the landing page. You will need to select this icon in order to see the properties that are designated in your portfolio to you. So how do you log on? Well, first, the owner or the award recipient who's set up in the system must grant access to any individual that they authorize to be able to use the software or to access their portfolio. Just as a friendly reminder, if you can mute your line, thank you. Once the owner grants you access, you will then receive a username and a password. You can use that username and password to register. You can follow the new user register here link on our landing page. And then once you are able to register, you can notify Megan Simpson at msimpson1@ihcda.in.gov. If you have any issues or concerns with your registration, please be sure to reach out to any one of my staff and we will gladly work with you to ensure that we can get you registered. Just again, to reiterate, we cannot grant authorization to anyone that the owner has not provided us authorization to grant permissions to. So if you are new property management for a project, you will need to have that owner fill out the compliance forms 29 and 30 or 30 to make sure that the authorization is being approved and granted. So before we can complete our annual owner cert, we have to first set up the units and assign the utility allowances to those units each year. Finally, tenant events need to be entered in. And while we say that this should occur every 30 days, unfortunately, we know that sometimes life happens and they don't always get done when we anticipate to do them. If you are familiar with how to do the unit setups and the utility allowances, you can go ahead and skip to slide 64 when this presentation is posted. But for the presentation today, we're just going to walk through all of this to ensure that anyone who's new knows all the steps to be able to successfully complete and submit their annual owner cert. So creating a new unit. Once you've identified the property that you wish to update, you will select the building that you want to update a unit for. That will bring up the screen for building details, and then you'll click the Add New Unit. Once you add the new unit, you will see a screen that allows you to name the unit, identify the number of bedrooms assigned to that unit, enter in the square footage, and the AMI percentage that's designated to that specific unit. You can further identify whether this will be a program unit, a manager's unit, or a market rent unit, and the status date or when that unit became the unit type that was identified. You can also identify how that program is funded. Is it a tax credit only? Is it a home or housing trust fund or CDBG project? And what date did that unit become a program unit? You do not need to put the end date, and this should still allow you to move forward with entering the unit into the building. Once you've done that, you've successfully created a new unit. You will need to do this for every building within your project. Finally, utility allowances. IHCDA has guidance in our manual that speaks to if the owner pays for the utility allowances, you do not need to go through an approval process from IHCDA for your utility allowances to be approved. However, if the owner does not pay for the utility allowances, you will need to ensure that you update the utility allowances for each building in your project. This slide identifies how you would indicate that the owner pays for all utilities by selecting this box here and selecting update. And again, just like entering UAs for tenant paid utilities, you would need to ensure that you select this for every building in that project. To create a utility allowance, you would need to click on the project name. Then you would select the utility allowance. You have two options, which is either add new or copy. Because the utility allowances expire once per calendar year, even if the UA amounts are the same, a new UA must be entered in each of the allowance sections for each of the buildings. So just ensure that you are updating this. Otherwise, you will receive error messages when you complete your annual owner certification. If you're selecting to add a new utility allowance, you would first we recommend the date and the utility model type that you are utilizing for a specific building in the description field. You would then note the effective date, which would be the date that the UA was approved. Just as a friendly caution, the description is going to be the only item that tells you the UA that you've chosen for the tenant events later. So making sure that you clearly identify the UA in the description will give you that extra information you need to know as you proceed further. You will not need to put the bedroom size in the description because that is part of the types that are identified in the slide. You will note further on how many bedrooms are in each unit as you fill out the remaining sections. Note that you can use multiple utility allowances for the same property and have a varying UA throughout. So you will need to ensure that you're identifying which one you're using and which one's been approved for each of your buildings if you are one of the ones that utilizes a variety. So again, just to reiterate, you would make sure that you would put a description in that would be something easy for you to identify later. You'd enter the utility type for the building. You would select the bedroom size and the allowance type. Next, you would identify the source, the amount that the tenant is paying, and the allowance type again would be added here. You do need to make sure that the bin number for the project or the award number is checked, or this will not save to that project. Finally, you would click the Save button, and that will ensure that the UA is saved to the building that you've entered the utility allowance for. If you're choosing the copy option and the amounts have not changed, all you need to do is change the description and the effective date, and then select Save. Again, just to go over, if you're using different types of UAs like the HUD and the PHA, you want to make sure that you're clearly identifying them for each of the buildings and entering in the year, and this will ensure that you prevent some common UA issues during the compliance checks. This is how your utility allowances will appear once you've entered them in, so you can see chronologically what the dates are and how they're identified. Moving on to tenant events, we're going to go over the 3 types of tenant events that you can enter into IHCDA online, which is the move-in, the tenant recertification, and then the transfer in and out. In this section, we're going to cover all three of these tenant events, and then we will briefly cover the non-asset and income entries if you're utilizing the IHCDA online TIC. First, for move-ins. To move somebody in when a unit goes online, you would first click the plus to open the unit. Then you would click Add New Event. From there, you would begin entering the move in from the drop-down, select the utility allowance, and then enter all pertinent information in the white fields or the drop-down boxes for that event. You want to make sure that you enter the move-in date and make sure that the move-in date also matches the initial move-in for that event date. They should always be the same. If this does not autofill, you will need to make sure that you type that in, or else it will not allow you to proceed in IHCDA online. Next, you'll select the event type. Again, as I just said, this, of course, is going to be the move-in, the initial move-in for the tenant. Again, you'll identify the unit. You do not need to select anything from the drop-down box unless what's currently identified is incorrect. So if it's a program unit that's identified, but in the unit identity, it comes up as a model or a market rate, or by chance you have floating units within your property, you can select the appropriate unit identity and make sure that that is correctly identified. Once you've selected that, you can then move on to the utility allowance. Select the current utility allowance in the utility allowance field. And again, if it's market rate or owner paid utilities, you will click on the blank space and that will autofill with 0. Just as a friendly little tip, when we told you to clearly identify your UAs, the reason that this is going to be important is it'll allow you to know which one to select for the current reporting period. The next step would be to enter in the household income and to ensure that the income is entered for that initial move-in. So first, enter the total household income and then enter in the household income at move-in. So these may not be the same specific income limits, so make sure that you are reviewing those. It does not auto-populate, so you do have to manually enter them. And if you forget to enter the household income at move-in before you save, unfortunately, you will not be able to go back in without reaching out to us to reopen up the AOC for you. So just ensure that you're checking this and that you're always reviewing it for accuracy before you hit save. The rent and income limits should be able to be identified by the drop-down box that pertains to the specific project or the unit within that project. You would simply select from the drop-down limit what the set aside is for that unit. If you notice in the event details, this is identified as tenant portion. And then again, it is identified as the income level. As a friendly reminder, the tenant rent portion is the amount that the tenant the tenant pays. It does not include the utility allowance or any Section 8 rental assistance or any other subsidies that are being paid to the owner on behalf of the tenant. So let's talk about the subsidies that may be available for tenants. As most of us are familiar, Section 8 provides both project based and tenant based rental assistance, which is a subsidy that is received on behalf of the tenant. If a tenant has project based or housing choice voucher, you would enter the amount of the subsidy in the federal rent assist amount box identified by the first green arrow in the top slide. You would ensure that you identify what type of rental assistance this is. As you can see from this slide, it's tenant based, and then the source. For non federal rental assistance, some examples of this could be funding from Department of Mental Health and Addiction or Division of Mental Health and Addiction, some of the post foster care funding streams that are given on behalf of individuals that are exiting foster care, and then any other program source that's out there that is provided maybe through the COC or some other local not for profit organizations. Those would be also entered into the non-federal assist amount type on the amount that is being provided. The rental assistance type would be identified as the appropriate option from the drop down, and then the rental assist source, you would select what the appropriate source is. If it's an operating subsidy, if it is a not-for-profit subsidy, and ensure that you would identify that in the rental assist type areas for those. If your program has special needs designations, then you will need to enter the special needs code in the event details. You'll have to do this twice in the event details, and again, when you are entering in the member details that are on slide 38. However, if you have no special needs population within your project, you can simply leave this as none and then move on to the next step. If the tenant does receive rental assistance, again, we went over this in the last slide, but you would ensure that you select if it's property-based, tenant-based, owner-provided, and then select the source of assistance. If you're going left to right, you would go from the household member, um, the member count, and select the rental assistance source for both of these. Again, you will have to enter these twice. So as you can see here, the slide shows you how you would enter that information in with the household member count. We would hope that it's not an all student house and that this would always be no. And then next you would see the funding source, the rental assistance source, any student exemptions that may be applicable for the unit if there is a student count, and then any notes that you want to add to this information. As a friendly reminder, we do count any disclosed unborn children as part of the household member count. Um, and we want to make sure that you're accurately reflecting if there are students in the household. So you're almost done with your tenant events. And these are the last entries in the event details, specifically identifying the funding of the program. In our sample, we have an option that's only tax credit. However, you may have programs that are funded through home, housing trust funds, CDBG. So just ensure that you're properly documenting that and selecting the appropriate funding streams for those projects. Student explanation, as the note states, only applies if it has a household member who is attending school. Otherwise, you will just opt for the not applicable option within that drop down for student explanation. So to add a member, you would essentially fill in the same information. You would click on add a member, enter the first and last name. You would enter in their current income, the relationship to the head of household, and then any special needs if they're applicable, and the tenant's or household member's gender. Race and ethnicity is not required. However, if it is disclosed on the form, then please make sure that you select whether or not this household member identifies as Hispanic or Latino. As a friendly reminder, Social Security numbers are no longer required and they should not be entered into the field. So you can opt for do not or D and not disclosed. Do not enter Social Security numbers in the household member information. After you enter in all of the pertinent information for the new member, you would then move on to ensuring that you add the income for each individual that has income within the household. When all household members' current income are added together, it should equal the total household income that is entered at the bottom of the screen. So as you can see from this example, we have Adam who has $28,140, and we have Miss Smith who has $29,050 for a total income of $56,190. This will then generate the rent and AMI level for this individual in that county as it's designated for the bedroom size. Some key things to remember are student status is a required field. The options are student, non-student, or not applicable. Relationship and gender are also required fields. And the unborn child, if disclosed, is considered a household member. The options are listed here on this slide for your selection for all these statuses that are required to be completed in the tenant events. Special needs. This is a required field if there are special needs identified in your award documents. If there are no special needs identified, then you would just simply select none. And again, race and ethnicity is not a required field. However, if the household member chooses to identify, you can simply select the Hispanic or Latino box if it's applicable, and the identified race code that they've identified. A completed household entry would look similar to what is displayed in the slide here, and it would include any unborn children if they're disclosed to the property. So finally, this is the option to see that you've added household members, and if you would opt to do the tick, you could do so as well on IHCDA online, and then you would be done with this tenant event. Briefly going over the non-asset and income, this is generated and able to be filled in through IHCDA Online's generated tick. You would simply click on Add Non-Asset Income and follow the instructions listed on this slide. Click on the drop-down box to choose the household member for the income to be entered and the appropriate income source that is listed from the drop-down options. And you would need to do this for each member of the household as applicable for that household. Some more steps on adding asset income. And again, we won't go over this in depth, but if you choose to use IHCDA's tick, then this would be the field that you would update. Finally, to finish your move-in, you would simply ensure that you complete the move-in event by selecting the update button at the bottom of the page, as you can see here. And if you need a tick, you would click the tick button and then click on the tick income PDF tab that appears at the bottom of the page. The PDF is fillable, so non-optional charges can be entered as needed. You can identify any special fields, including if it exceeds the 140% rule, and it always should be no for move-in certification. Same steps kind of apply for recertifying tenants and for transferring in and out. So um, for time, we'll just briefly go over those, but the slides will be available for you to review at a later date as well. Recertify, you're still going to select the add new event in the building that you're wishing to update for the unit. You're going to go through the event types like we did in the move-in, select the income levels, and then you'll add the event details. You want to make sure that the recertification date is entered into the event date. This should always be for tax credit projects. It should be the anniversary date of the move-in date. Then you would select the event type. And in this part of our course, of course, we would select the recertify. Once the recertify is updated into the system, you'll complete the remaining fields. You'll enter the utility allowance, and the allowance amount field will autofill once you select this option. Same thing for owner paid utilities. You can click the blank space and then 0 will populate. Again, same reminder, if you describe your utility allowance, it'll allow you to properly select the right one. Total household income, rent level, and income level. Same as with the move-in, you'll want to ensure that you enter in the event type, the event date, the UA, and then the total household income at the time of recertification. You would enter in the income level as well from the drop-down box for that designated unit or for that designated household member. Same reminder for tenant rent, it is only the rent that the tenant pays, and it does not include any rental assistance, nor does it include any utility allowance. Again, same steps and clarifications on federal rental assistance and non-federal rental assistance as we discussed in the move-in. And then again, the special needs code would be the same steps as we discussed in the initial move-in. Finally, same information on how to designate and identify federally assisted and rental assistance provided on behalf of the household. Household member count and all student household is also the same as it would be entered in the same steps for the initial move-in. You would then identify the funding stream, just like we do with the initial move-in. Again, for this example, we only have tax credit, but if this property has multiple funding streams, you would select the options available. You would identify and ensure that the current household information is up to date during the time of the recertification, and that all household members' income is also updated. And You would have successfully completed the recert of a tenant event if you followed these steps. Transfer in and out is a little bit different as it has some different nuances. And this is our final type of event that we enter for tenants. The transfer in and out, same steps as before. We would identify the unit, we would add the new event, and then from there we would enter transfer in and out as our option from the event type. You would enter the transfer date into the event field and select the event type. And we're going to start with a transfer out first, and then we would go into the transfer in. You would transfer to the building or to the unit. Once you have selected the transfer out, you'd have two new fields that would populate. First field would be transfer to building, and the next field, as you can see, identified with the green arrow, would be the unit. So the unit the household is transferring to must not currently be occupied in our system. If the unit has been occupied, you would need to enter in a move out event and then start the transfer event. The transfer to a building allows you to select the building from the transfer building option drop down and then identify the unit that the individual would be going into. You would want to then select the update at the bottom left to finish. Okay. And we do have a question that has come in. Wanda, could you unmute yourself to ask your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so I've done a transfer in or transfer out to a transfer in.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did the transfer over, it
Mm-hmm.
zeroed out the transfer out, but it did not move that money or none of the information over into the transfer in. And it would not let me hard key that information over. So I haven't used I just stopped using the transfer because it didn't work. Is that correct or incorrect?
It should work. So I appreciate you letting us know. I will talk with our vendor to see why that's not working. And if you would email me so that I can see how that appeared, because we have gone through some updates to IHCDA online. If you can email me where that occurred, I can show that to our IT and our developer for the IHCDA online and see if this is something that's been resolved.
Okay, I'll go back and find out which one I did because I keep up with that, and then I'll email it to you.
Perfect. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Wanda. Thank
Okay.
you. Does anybody else have any experience with the transfer in and out issues recently not working? I'll take silence as a no and assume that everybody is either using it and it's working fine, or everybody is just utilizing the move in, move out feature. All right, so just as an overview, once you've completed your transfer in and out, this is what your screen in IHCDA online should look like. You should see add new event, transfer in, move out for the individual that was in unit 2, and then you should see that they are moved into a new unit. Or I'm sorry, you should see that they are moved into unit 2 and they transferred out of unit 7. Again, you want to be sure to update the information and make sure that this is all transferred over. if you receive this orange warning that the rent portion is 0, I think, Wanda, this might speak to what you were asking about too. Once you've clicked on your newly created transfer in event, excuse me, be sure to update the information that transferred over. The transferred information comes from the unit, the head of household information. So you just want to make sure that if there's any issues with that the head of household information that was transferred, that their information is updated. Once all the fields have been updated, just ensure that you click on Submit button to save your event, and you are done with the transfer. So other event types that we have would be the composition update, rent updates, and student status updates. Once you've entered all of that information in and completed the fields, you would just simply save that, and then you'd be able to move on to the next step for the move out event. Right. I will pause there because that's a lot of information before we move into the actual reason why I think most everyone is here. We've walked through how you enter in information on IHCDA online so that we can now get to the annual owner certification. Before we transition, does anyone have any questions? If you have a question, just simply click on the raise your hand and we will move forward with having you unmute your line to ask your question. You can also additionally type your question in the chat if you prefer. All right, well, we don't see any questions, but that doesn't mean that you have no other opportunity to ask them. We will move in. So moving on to the annual owner certification. I apologize, I had to clear my throat. We're going to go back to how you log on. And again, just to reiterate, as we shared in the beginning, the owner of the award must grant access to any authorized user. Again, same steps are listed here. That if you need to register for the first time, you would notify Megan Simpson that you've registered and follow the steps here. Once you enter in your username and password, you will be able to see all of the projects that are sent to you in your, or that you're authorized to view. In this section, we're going to walk through the AOC from start to finish and just ensure that you remember to enter all of your tenant events in for the year before starting this process, as this will make your AOC much easier. Okay, so getting started, first you're going to click on the owner certification. Once you select the owner certification, it is going to bring you to all of the projects that are assigned to you. You will select on the appropriate project and ensure that you're selecting the appropriate year. Next, you will select the Continue with Annual Certification tab in order to move forward with doing the AOC for this specific project. If this is a tax credit project and this is the first year that you are certifying or submitting an annual owner certification, you are required to submit the 8609 Part 2 that the owner has filled out if an 8609 has been issued to you. If the 8609 has not been issued, but this is going to be the first year that you're going to claim credits, please ensure that you identify such in the notes section as we go further into this. You can additionally upload a document that states pending 8609 and still select the yes option as the first year to submit an AOC, but this will allow the auditors to know that the Part 2 has not been completed at this time. The next screen that you'll come to is going to be the Property General Information screen. You want to ensure that you are reviewing this to see, is the project name, address, and all of the details correctly identified here? And if not, you would select no from the project information is up to date. If the project information is up to date, then you would simply leave this as yes and move on to the next section. The next section is ensuring that you review the property management information. Again, if there's been any change to the property management, you would ensure that you select the no in this dropdown and then update the fields on the on-site manager so that we know that we have to update that on our end. Now, just updating it here does not always ensure that it's updated on everything. You may still need to submit the compliance forms 29 or compliance form 30 for it to be updated in all of our systems. When this presentation is made available online, you will be able to simply click here and obtain copies of those forms. It is very important that you review to ensure that this information is updated. We've had a lot of questions about signatories and if they're required or not. If you need a blank signatory page, any one of my auditors can provide you with that. Moving forward, this may not be something that we require in the next annual owner certifications that'll be due in 2024. Ensure that you properly identify the utility information and note if this property is in its extended use period. Again, extended use is only applicable for tax credit, and extended use would not apply for the federally funded programs. Next, you would ensure that you select from the drop-down options the funding stream for the project. If your project has multiple funding streams, you would want to ensure that you are selecting combined RHTC and federal programs. If you are uncertain if this project has multiple funding streams, please ensure that you review the original award documents, any closeout letters, or any other documentation that was provided to the owner or the grantee when the award initially was allocated or funded. Failure to properly identify the certification type could impact your ability to finalize your AOC. So it is very important that you identify this. It could also impact some of the errors that you receive later on throughout the AOC. Next, you want to ensure that you enter the owner certification year. For the purpose of this presentation, the 2023 information that will be submitted will be for tax year 2022. Questions 2 and 3 apply to fair housing, reasonable accommodations. You want to ensure that you're properly documenting whether or not you've had any findings of fair housing or discrimination against the property owner for the project. Additionally, you would notify us in question 3 if any reasonable accommodations have been requested or any reasonable modifications had been requested within the last year. And if so, you would identify the number of requests and what accommodations or modifications the owner was able to provide, and then if there were any that were not able to be accommodated. If you've had no reasonable accommodation requests or reasonable modifications, you would simply leave 3.1 to 3.3 blank. Questions 4 and 5 are speaking about the physical condition of the property and then the affirmative fair marketing plan for federal programming. So first, in question 4, you would identify if all of the units are suitable for occupancy. If all units are not suitable for occupancy, then you would select the second option for question 4, and you would then upload any documentation that would indicate any violations or any findings that were issued through an inspection throughout that certification year. If you've had an 8823 or a casualty loss, you would need to provide that documentation here and notify us of those issues. And then if you've had any federal programs that had deficiencies found, you would also provide us with documentation for that, knowing that 8823s and casualty loss forms may not be applicable for federal funded programs. Finally, for development that has 5 or more home assisted or home eligible units, the Community Development Block Grant or Block Grant Disaster Funding or NSP, you would need to identify if that is applicable to your property and then identify the affirmative fair marketing practices that are applicable. If you're not currently using affirmative fair marketing, you would select no and leave this option blank. If you're not using it but you're required to, please make sure you notify us of that. Next, reporting vacant units. If vacant units apply, you would need to select the applicable options in question 7 and then ensure that you provide the appropriate documentation into the drop files. So if you have no vacant units during the course of the reporting period, you would simply select no. However, if you do have vacant units, you would select which of the 2 options apply in question 7 and then provide your reasonable efforts to make those units available. Question 8 talks about if there was a mutual termination between the owner and the tenant. Question 9 is discussing if the unit was otherwise in compliance. And then 10 is specific for federally funded programs, as is with 11. And then finally 12 is talking about certifying that the owner has not terminated tenancy or refused to renew a lease for anyone during this reporting period for serious or repeated lease violations. And question 13 is speaking about the owner has served written notice to a tenant to specify the grounds for an action at least 30 days before the termination. So you would ensure that these all apply to your property and then respond accordingly. Finally, questions 14 through 18 are talking about, 14 is talking about further certifying the fair housing and over income. And then Exhibit C must be completed for all home funded projects currently in their period of affordability. So again, going back to multiple funding streams for a project, if you have a home funded project, but the affordability period has ended, you would not need to complete this. However, if the period of affordability is still active, you would need to ensure that you complete Exhibit C. And then document any over income households or student status for the home assisted unit as applicable in questions 17 and 18. Asset management needs to be completed for every single property except CDBG funded shelter projects, or the migrant farm worker housing that is through CDBG. This document is not reviewed by my team other than to ensure that this is fully filled out and completed. So please ensure that when you are completing your projects and doing your AOCs, that this is accurate and that this is filled out in its entirety, unless you are operating a CDBG funded shelter or farm worker house only. Finally, in the beginning of this AOC, we had the opportunity to tell us if there was any changes that had occurred. This section allows you to notify us of any anticipated changes that are planned in the next 12 months. This will alert my auditors and myself to know if there's any anticipated changes in property ownership or property management. And then next in question 30, to let us know if this owner or company is having any issues with non-compliance for any other funding stream, or if they are in good status. If there's any program changes or program non-compliance, we do request that you upload that information and provide an explanation in question 31, and just make us aware of what the issue is and how that's being rectified. Thank you, Michelle. Finally, errors. Red errors, like the one pictured here, are errors that must be corrected in order for you to proceed throughout the annual owner certification. Whereas orange errors will show up when there is a warning or an issue that will still allow you to proceed through the system, but there may be something that needs to be clarified in the notes section for the auditor to understand why this error has occurred. And we do understand that some of these orange errors occur because of how our system processes, and one of the common errors that we get is the over income orange error that seems to come up when somebody has Section 8 housing. So again, in order to modify errors, you will need to make sure the red errors are all resolved and the orange errors are all addressed before you can finalize your AOC. Next is Exhibit E. If your award agreement has commercial space, this exhibit must be filled out and submitted. Leanne, if you could shoot me an email, myself or Megan, to let us know which specific project you're receiving the over income errors on, we can go ahead and see what is occurring there. That should not be occurring for individuals.
Carol, I have a question. This is Wanda.
Go ahead, Wanda. And there's my email address.
So where I am in a nursing home, our liability is over exceeding our income. Not the income, I'm sorry, the rent. So that's always going to be out of compliance for us. So how can we get around that when the liability, because it's including extra nursing services and everything, which the state of Indiana says this is your liability. For instance, one person, their liability may be $1,865, but the rent income might be $460 65. I'm just making up those numbers. So we're already over.
Right.
Rent.
So nursing homes are a little bit different because the medical services that are billed would be separated out from the rent that the tenant is being charged. So unless there's non-optional fees like a community fee or something like that that the tenant can't opt out of, the actual room, the rent that's charged to the tenant to stay there should be at or below the rent limit for that county and that bedroom size.
So how do I fix that on my tick? I don't.
I know that we had a conversation before and we were discussing that, and you were going to send me a couple copies of your tick and your lease agreements for the participants.
Okay.
Send that over to me and we will, I will go ahead and work with Matt to see how we can provide the best guidance, because what we are finding is, unfortunately, in nursing home environments, this does not seem to work with all the additional charges that are billed to the individual in the nursing home. So we want to make sure that we're fully understanding that process
Okay.
and how to best document it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions specific to errors, the red errors or the orange? So errors that have to be corrected and orange is warnings that you can provide the clarification. And as you can see, Megan, who is our resident expert on all things IHCDA online, is responding to some questions in the chat. So as she noted, that you would just simply send us a note so that we could see that. And again, Leanne, you can also send us examples so we can see exactly what's going on. We know that this is occurring for some individuals, but without the specific examples, we can't always escalate it up to find out what's happening. Okay. Moving on to the commercial space. Again, if this is listed in your extended use agreement or your award documents, then you would need to complete this information and ensure that you fill this out. If it's not applicable, then you can simply just move forward. Next, Exhibit F. Now, Exhibit F is specific to our permanent supportive housing, and this must be filled out for any one of our permanent supportive housing partners who are providing permanent supportive housing and operating with an MOU for the service delivery. So Exhibit F is actually my team reviews to ensure that it's completed, but it is audited by the permanent supportive housing team, which is Zach Gross and Victoria Jennings, and they would be the ones that would advise if there's any non-compliant findings for this. Again, just to reiterate, you do need to, if you operate permanent supportive housing, you do need to complete Exhibit F. My team will, if this is identified needing to be filled out, but it's not completed, we will issue a findings letter on this. Finally, to finalize certification year and errors, you will go back to the main property detail page, select the finalize year, and then next you will see any of the errors. You can then select the error, the blue, and see what specific error you're getting. If the error is orange, you can go in and provide clarification. However, if the error is red, you must remediate that error before you can finalize your annual owner certification. Once you've finalized all of your errors and addressed all of your warnings, you would click the Proceed to Finalize. Oops, sorry about that. Our slides got a little out of order. Again, you would use the notes section for the orange errors, and then you would use the remediation tools, our manuals on how to clarify or correct these major red errors. Once you've completed that, you would select Proceed to Finalize. You should see a screen such as this. This will tell you that the AOC was successfully submitted on the date and the time that it was submitted. This is also recorded on our side for us to see that the AOC has been submitted. You can then select the print button to receive a copy of the AOC for your records. And once you have completed that, entered in all of your tenant events, and as applicable, submitted your annual owner cert fees, and they're received through IHCDA online timely, which is on or before January 31st, then you have successfully completed the annual owner certification. So then what next? After the annual owner certs are all sent to us, my team begins to review those. You will then receive either a notice of successful completion, issues letter, or an issues resolved letter. We ask that if you receive an issues letter or you receive any other notice that failure to submit AOC, that you respond timely to my auditors so that we can make sure that your unit does fall back into compliance as quickly as possible. As a friendly reminder, the notices are sent to the identified owner and then any current property management company that is listed in our system, unless it's been updated and in the process of being updated. Just simply noting in the AOC that there has been a change does not automatically ensure that that is updated throughout all of our systems. You still may need to submit the compliance form 29 or compliance form 30. Some of our additional resources can be found on our landing page. Our red notices and red compliance team are listed on the ihcda.in.gov website. And if you just simply search in compliance, you'll be taken right to our main page. Okay. Dawn, for the signatory page, right now, the form is required to be submitted with the AOC. So you're essentially just letting us know if something has changed with the original signatory. We are looking at moving forward with removing this as a requirement for the AOC. However, it's not going to be removed for this AOC period. So if you need a copy of the form, we can get it to you so you can upload it. Did that answer your question? We are going to send this presentation to our marketing team, and they should be able to make it available within the next couple days. Again, we want to thank you. Yes, the payment portal is open. Dawn, yes, you can just use the same form that you have on file if nothing's changed. Sarah, as of 2019, IHCDA had noted that all payments must be made via IHCDA online. We then further finalized that and indicated that it must be made through IHCDA online in our updated manuals this year. So if you are mailing a paper check, that paper check needs to have been sent to us and processed through our accounting department prior to January 31st in order to avoid late fees. So certified mail, it doesn't come to us, it goes to our program accounting department. And as long as it clearly identifies the building numbers, the award numbers, what the payment is for, and it's able to be processed, then it should be fine. But otherwise, it could take some time. So as we noted in the intro to our manuals this year, and we've shared repeatedly throughout since 2019, IHCDA Online is the required method for ensuring payment is submitted. Um, and then Shayla, I don't see your question, but I see. There is no certificate because we did not have anybody register. So this is simply just a guide and some technical assistance to our partners to hopefully allow the AOC process to be a little bit easier, just because we know there's such a high volume of new folks, both at IHCDA as well as with our partners. So IHCDA posts our red notices when we sponsor trainings. So our IHCDA sponsored trainings will have a link that you can utilize to register for any of those trainings. We have not issued the red notices for 2023, but we have worked with US Housing and Costello Compliance, and we will be posting those notices for our partners to register. If you're not currently signed up for IHCDA alerts, you can go to any one of our IHCDA pages, web pages, and then find the email icon at the bottom right-hand side of the screen to set up registration. My pleasure, Leanne. I hope that this information was valuable to everyone. We welcome any feedback that you give, and we would love to be able to offer more of these web series in the future for our partners. We are about 15 minutes early. Thank you, Alice. So if no one has any more questions, we can go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you guys very much. We appreciate the positive feedback. It makes it very helpful.